So today we're going to talk about the next lesson plan I talked about and I created. It's about weather briefings. So what is a weather briefing and why is it important in aviation? During last week we got a chance to talk about different types of weather. We got to talk about different types of weather sources and information you can receive before you go flying. So now weather briefing is kind of taking all those big things, all those charts and all that information you get from METARs and TAFs and plugging it all in together and being able to discuss the weather and talk about it and give a weather briefing. One thing important with weather briefing is it gives you, your instructor, and perhaps your passengers a good opportunity to understand what's going on with the weather, what to expect in flight, and what's going to happen with the rest of the day with regards to the weather. One thing I like to think about in weather, I was talking to Mr. Stanchek and Alex Svensson, and I looked at them, I was like, have you guys ever been flying before and been surprised by the weather? They both kind of looked at me and they're kind of like, yeah, we have. I have too. Not flying, perhaps, because we've always been forced to do weather briefings and such at Liberty, but I've gone out and done deer hunting and bass fishing before, and I've been very surprised by the weather. I've been on the lake before, and the weather's it changed or it came in a lot quicker than I thought it would, and it was scary being on the water with a thunderstorm rolling down your neck. So that's why it's important to understand weather and understand what the systems are going to be doing in your area to prevent being surprised by the weather. Nothing's worse than being surprised by a system that you weren't expecting or severe weather that's come your way that you weren't really ready for. So basically, a weather briefing is going to take that surprise out of the flying. It's going to take that surprise out of the trip, and it's going to get everybody on the same page. It's going to get everyone focused together on what's going to happen with the weather. So what we're going to do is I'm going to break down a basic how I do a weather briefing. It's a little hard to do on a video because I can't show you everything important. Some of the things I like to use is I like to use an online source for a weather briefing. Sometimes I also like to call and get a supplemental for that as well to make sure I'm getting all the information correctly. Another thing, I look at METARs, TAFs, and all that important stuff. I also like to look at charts. A very important look at charts. I use a 4Flight app to kind of roll through everything. It gives that weather in very nice systematic format that's provided in a way that I can understand and other pilots can understand too, and then in turn give a good weather briefing. So for me, I like to start with the weather briefings. We're going to go over those in a second. Then I like to go to 4Flight. Then I like to do what Mr. Mashburn always told us to do, and just go outside and look. Get a feel for the weather's doing, feel the winds, kind of understand what you expect. It's a hot day, am I going to think thunderstorms? Is it a cold day? Should I be experiencing icing? Going outside starts getting your head thinking about, hey, what's this weather going to do today? What should I expect before I even look at these paper documents and this information? Okay, so that's kind of like I like to do it. Then once I get all this information accumulated, I like to sit down with my instructor and we discuss it. We have a two-way conversation. It's not me just spitting out information like, okay, this is this, and that. It's I'm telling him, hey, this is what I see the weather's going to have. This is my concerns. What are your concerns? I get him involved in the conversation because a weather briefing is great, but I shouldn't just be spitting off information and then going flying. We should be discussing it and discussing in terms of can this flight be performed successfully. Okay, so now let's dive a little deeper into some of the stuff that I use for my weather briefings. I've said it a couple times. There's something called a weather briefing. I know we're talking about weather briefings, but that's just in turn the definition of talking to me and my instructor about what's going on with weather. You can get an FAA regulated weather briefing through a couple sources. You can give a phone call and call 1-800-WX-BRIEF. That is going to get you a briefer, and you can go through give them some information, and they're going to give you a weather briefing. You can also go online, give them the online source the exact same information, and they're actually going to give you the exact same briefing. Only thing different is it's going to be information for you to read, and the briefer is not going to be reading it to you. There's three different types of briefings. We have a standard briefing, an abbreviated briefing, and an outlook briefing. Every one of those is a little different. Every one of them you're going to use for different things. You can actually use all three for one flight. You can get an outlook briefing before, then you can get a standard briefing, and then maybe you can get an abbreviated briefing before you take off, just so you have a good idea of what the weather is going on. But we're going to break down each one of them. We're talking about the standard briefing. A standard briefing is going to provide the most complete information and most complete weather picture for you. This should be obtained prior to the departure of the flight, and it should be used during the flight planning. So I should use this weather to go ahead and do my flight planning calculations. The weather I get from my weather briefing is good information I can use to calculate fuel burn distance, winds aloft, and stuff like that. It's all very helpful in locating that kind of information. So you can get it, that's two ways, 1-800-WX-BRIEF, or you can get it online as well. You type in that website, 1-800-WX-BRIEF, and it's actually going to pull up an opportunity for you to do that. What is it going to provide? It's going to provide adverse conditions. Adverse conditions include weather conditions that can be encountered during your route, thunderstorms, icing, and airport closing. Things that would adversely affect and negatively affect my performance and my ability to operate the aircraft. They're also going to let you know if VFR is not recommended. A couple times I've been flying over to Charlie West over there in West Virginia, and you have to go over a lot of mountains. And I've heard before, hey, VFR not recommended for this flight because of mountain obscuration. That's something they're going to tell you, which is really nice to hear because if you get on the phone, they're going to say that. But if you get all the information on like a website format, you're not going to get that. So that's a very important part of maybe picking up the phone and calling them. They're going to give you a synopsis. A synopsis is a picture, an overview of the larger weather picture, fronts and major systems that may affect the route of flight, may not, but fronts do affect the weather even before they hit. So it's important to understand where these fronts and these major systems can be located. So I'm going to give you current conditions at the airport I'm taking off at, and I'm going to departing at, and en route structure as well. It's going to let me know, hey, this is your current conditions at Lynchburg. Here's your current conditions at Martinsville. This is what you should expect when you land, and then you can make a decision off of that. They're also giving an en route forecast, a summary of the weather forecast for the proposed route of flight. So basically, they're going to look at your route of flight, where you're going to be flying, your en route structure, and they're going to be like, okay, there's clouds here, there's a thunderstorm might pop up here, you might have mountain obscuration here, so now VFR not recommended. That's where they're going to start seeing, hey, what is it going to, the big picture of my flight here. They're not just looking at airport A and airport B through METARs. They're looking at, okay, let's pull up the radar, let's pull up weather depiction charts, and let's see what the weather is doing in between points A and B. They're going to give you destination forecast. I've already talked about it. They're going to give you a forecast or something like at Martinsville, what your their forecasts are now and what they might be expected to be when you get there. They're also going to give you forecast winds and temperatures aloft. Why is that important? Because it's going to help you with your planning and your calculations from getting point A to point B. It's also going to let you know where freezing levels may be, and if you're going to be operating in a potential freezing zone, freezing level, you know not to get in the clouds. That's why it's super important. They're also going to give you something called notices to airmen, or like pilots like to call them NOTAMs. NOTAM is basically just information that pilot needs to know and understand before they go flying. At Lynchburg, you probably heard the NOTAMs about the cranes when they're building those new towers. It's the same thing. They're going to be letting you know of obstacles, closures, anything that's pertinent to a pilot before he goes flying or before he lands in an airport. One of the last things they're going to let you know of, hey, there's known ATC delays. This is what you might expect when you get there. They also could give other information. Basically, anything that thinks is important to the flight, they're going to give it to you. So that's a standard briefing. It's a very large picture of what's going on as a whole. They're going to take the map, they're going to start narrowing it down till they get to very specific weather patterns and weather systems. Then you can get what we call an abbreviated briefing. Okay, an abbreviated briefing is just like it sounds. It's a shortened briefing of the standard version. It should be requested when a departure has been delayed or when the weather information is needed to update the previous briefing. So maybe I called and got my standard briefing, and then I got delayed on the runway for 2 hours. That weather maybe I got in the standard briefing isn't as accurate anymore as maybe if I got an abbreviated. So give them a call, say I'd like an abbreviated briefing. This is the information I have already, and they're going to let you know what's changed and what's different. That's super helpful to know because if you are holding because of weather delays or something, now you can get a better picture and a recent picture of what's going on with the weather. The last one you can get is an outlook briefing. Okay, an outlook briefing should be requested when a plane departure is 6 or more hours away. So I'm going to go flying tomorrow. Maybe I'll give an outlook briefing just so I kind of start thinking about what the weather is going to be like. Why is that important? Because if you start thinking about what the weather is going to be like and what you could experience flying tomorrow, that's going to put you one step ahead of the aircraft when you actually start flying that aircraft. It's super important because it provides initial forecast information that is limited in scope due to the time frame of the planned flight. This can influence a go or no-go decision. Hey, it's going to be pouring rain tomorrow. I'm not going to go flying. So I can maybe plan something else. I can go do a ground or something. Outlook briefing is a great way to schedule and plan ahead. Okay? On my lesson plan here, I have something called a picture of a kind of screenshot of the information you fill out for a weather briefing. Weather briefings are pretty simple. When you want to go get one, you just plug in all this information, your destination, your departure, airport, your information, the souls on board, your true airspeed, your altitude, your type of aircraft, and all this information that you should know. You plug it in there, they're going to give you all this great information. Another thing is in the Liberty's flight ops operations area, also in the planning room, there's these little cards you can go and fill out that's got all the same information. And when you call a briefer, you can actually roll through that information in the order you wrote it down, and the briefer is going to know exactly what you want. Okay? So how do I do a weather briefing? Okay, so I receive my weather briefing from online and then go through each page and write down pertinent information that I want to talk about with my instructor or with a student. Then I take the ForeFlight app out and I go to the weather section at both my airport I'm going to and my departure airport or my arrival airport and maybe some airports in between. And I go through and I see what their the TAFs are, the METARs are, the winds aloft at these airports, and what I should expect. I write down any information that maybe I didn't see before in my standard briefings, and I go there. And then I go to then I start going to charts and I'm looking at synopsis pages and weather depiction charts and I start seeing where my fronts are located and where I might have heavy precipitation versus, cloud clearance and mountain obscuration, stuff like that. Stuff that might be important for me to know when I'm planning my route. Then I go ahead and I plan my route around the weather and I make it all work. And then now I'm ready to give my briefing to my instructor or my student. So now I have this great book, the Aviation Weather book, and I was kind of going through it, preparing for this lesson, and I found something really cool. It was a self-briefing procedure flow. It's just a flow from start to finish about how to give a good self-briefing, weather briefing to an instructor. So the first thing is weather awareness. That's the first step. What is the weather doing today? So this is going to give you a play-by-play of how this book says we should do a weather briefing. I've kind of already given you my idea of it. Now we're going to go through what a book says, and you're kind of see the similarities between the two of them. What is the weather doing today? Weather awareness. Go outside. Is it snowing? Is it raining? Is it windy? Get an idea of what the weather is doing. Is it hot or is it cold? So then my mind starts thinking about weather. Okay? Knowledge of available and relevance weather products. Matt Souther made a great chart. It breaks down all the types of weather products you can get. Weather depiction charts, TAFs, METARs, and it breaks down, what they are, what they provide, and their time of usage and stuff like that. Take that chart out. Look at it, use the charts, and then start getting a better understanding and building that picture and building that pyramid, if you will, of what the weather system is doing. The next thing is very important. It's self-evaluation. So that means two things. Doing the I'm safe checklist, making sure I'm physically fit to go fly. Okay, so I'm physically fit to go fly, but that's not all that's important of self-evaluation. Taking the weather I've already looked at, my winds, my rain, my snow, whatever's going on, am I comfortable in flying in this? If I say yes, continue the checklist. If I say no, then it's going to be a no-go decision. We're going to postpone the flight. Okay, so that's important in self-evaluation, making sure that I'm prepared for the flight and the weather that's going on. The next one is almost as important as well. Aircraft capability. Am I outside my crosswind component limit? Am I or am I not? If I am, we're not going to fly. If I'm within it, then we're good to go. Is my aircraft capable of flying in icing? If you're flying a Liberty plane, the answer is most definitely no. Some aircraft are capable of flying in icing, but for training purposes and for us, we're not going to fly in icing conditions like that, or any condition that could lead to icing conditions. So, is my aircraft capable of flying at? The next step is flight depiction. I've looked at all my weather. I've compiled my pyramid so far. Let's plan this flight. Can this flight be actually accomplished with the weather I have? Yes or no? No go decision. Depends on how you plan that. Weather overview. This is just like when you're pre-flighting an aircraft, and once you're done, you take a step back and you look and make sure you got two wings, or one wing, and two engines. If you're in the Seminole and you got a tail, it all looks like an airplane. Same idea. Take a step back, take a breath, and look at the weather. Okay, is it snowing? Is it raining? Is it a thunderstorm out there? Do I have Hurricane Irma beating down my neck? Maybe. I don't know. Look at the weather as a whole and make a decision here. This is where it's a good time to okay, is my weather going to actually negatively affect my flight? And then that's where it kind of leads into the next one. Pre-flight weather evaluation. What is the likelihood of me having a safe flight based on all this stuff? I've looked at the weather, I've looked at myself, I've looked at the plane. This is my flight plan. Is this going to be a safe flight? Okay? This is the time you make the no-go decision. You have all your information compiled, and now it's time to take that PIC mentality and make the decision of going or not going. Everybody wants to go flying, but nobody wants to be going flying or be up in the air and wish they were on the ground because of weather. I'd rather be on the ground being like, oh, it's a good day to go flying and not be flying than be in the air tossed around by a thunderstorm like, man, I wish I was on the ground. So make a good decision based on the weather you have and a good decision based on your ability as a pilot. That's super important and super critical to making sure that you're going to have that safe flight and that safe return back to wherever you're coming from. Okay, so that's before flying. What about in flying? Can I do a weather briefing in flying? As soon as I take off, if there's no more briefings about weather? No, there is. So you can get information from HIWAS and stuff like that. ATCs can advise you about, different changes in weather. They can help vector you around and stuff like that. So if you get in-flight weather advisories about weather going on, you can actually make a change. If there's no change in weather, you're going to continue to your destination. If there's a bad weather change, simply it's just going to be divert to alternate. Now, there's a lot more that goes into making an alternate decision, deciding to divert to an alternate. And there's a lot of more information you probably need. But for a basic understanding, if there's no change in the weather, I'm going to continue. If there's a bad change in weather, I'm not going to continue. I'm going to divert to an alternate, okay? So, some of the questions I want to ask and make sure my students are understanding are, what are the three types of weather briefing? And from them, I want to hear standard, abbreviated, and outlook, okay? I want them to be able to understand that there's three different types. They have three options. And then what are some of the differences between the three? I want them to basically touch that standard's the most complete, Abbreviated is a shorter one, and Outlook is 6+ hours away from my planned departure. My next question would be, what is included in the standard briefing? I just want some basic understanding of what they're going to hear. VFR not recommended is big. Adverse weather conditions, notices to airmen, stuff like that. All right, and then why is the weather briefing important? This is the most important question to ask, because if they don't understand why a weather briefing is important, why are they going to give me a good one? Why are they going to give the next instructor a good one? Weather briefings are super important because it sets the tone for the flight. If I go give a crappy weather briefing and my takeoff briefing is going to be crappy, my departure briefing is going to be crappy, I'm going to have a crappy flight, it's just going to start snowballing. So what's important is starting with a good weather briefing, because then it's going to lead to a good takeoff and departure briefing, it's going to lead to a good flight, and it's going to be return back home. Okay, so that's why it's good to start with a weather briefing, because it's a good start to the day. And the last question is, should I only use the weather briefing in my own weather brief? The answer is no. You should use as much weather as you can find. You can find weather from many different sources. It doesn't matter. As long as it's a valid and accurate source, bring it to the table, use it to get an accurate depiction of what's going on with the weather. Okay, the key to a safe and successful flight begins with a sound and good weather briefing. Combining all the key elements we talked about with Matt and Davis and their weather products and their weather theory, combining all that we've learned with them and then giving a good weather briefing is the key to a safe and successful flight.